You're absolutely useless here. You just mess up our whole routine. The word, useless, didn't just pierce. It shattered something inside me. I froze, the heavy dish of baked ziti still trembling in my hands, as Jessica's face contorted, a venomous blend of rage and contempt. The dining room fell into a silence so profound it roared, broken only by the sharp clatter of silverware Ethan dropped, startled by his mother's raw fury. My eyes found David, my son, pleading for a defense that never came. He simply lowered his gaze to his untouched plate, a wall between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a breath, a shameful whisper. "Mom, maybe it's better if you find somewhere else. This isn't working." The floor didn't just vanish, it cracked beneath me. My own son, my David, the boy I'd rocked through countless nights, now asking me to abandon the very home I'd helped build. The house on the land. Arthur and I had gifted them for their wedding, a lifetime of savings poured into its foundation. 5-year-old Lily, eyes wide and uncomprehending, watched the wreckage. I set the ziti down with a deliberate, almost reverent care. Even then, I couldn't bear to cause more trouble, and walked out. No words. What was there to say? At 67, I was no longer a mother, a grandmother. I was a burden. You must be wondering how a woman reaches this precipice. How a mother, a grandmother, finds herself cast out, branded useless in front of her own flesh and blood. Let me take you back. 6 months earlier, I buried Arthur, my partner of 42 years. I returned to a house that echoed with his absence, every corner a ghost of memory. The couch where we'd shared our evening shows, the kitchen where Sunday breakfasts had hummed with life, the garden we'd nurtured together. It all felt vast, hollow, suffocating without him. It was David who offered the lifeline. I remember the day vividly. He arrived after work, found me a ghost in Arthur's armchair, clutching one of his worn shirts. "Mom," he murmured, settling beside me. "I can't stand seeing you like this, so alone. Why don't you come live with us? The house is huge. The kids would adore having Grandma around, and you could help us with them while we work." It sounded like salvation. I was adrift. They were overwhelmed. Ethan, 8, and Lily, 5, both in school, with parents juggling full-time careers. Jessica managed a department store. David, an engineer, often worked late. "Are you certain Jessica wouldn't mind?" I asked, a flicker of doubt. "Of course not, Mom. It was her idea. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I sold our smaller house, tucked the money into savings, for emergencies, as Arthur always preached, and moved in 2 weeks later. The first few days felt like a dream. My downstairs room, a cozy sanctuary with its own bath. The children utterly delighted. Ethan proudly displayed his school drawings. Lily insisted I braid her hair each morning. "Just like Grandma does," she'd chirp to her mother. We fell into a rhythm. I'd make breakfast, walk them to school, prepare lunch, pick them up, tackle homework, and have dinner ready before Jessica and David arrived. By the time my daughter-in-law swept through the door, usually past 8, a hot meal awaited, the children bathed and ready for bed. "Thanks, Susan," she'd offer, her gaze always skirting mine, as she quickly served herself and rattled off questions about the kids' day. It was a Tuesday, 2 months in, when the first cracks appeared. Jessica arrived home early. Later, I'd learned she'd been to a job interview at another store, and found the children happily munching on cookies I'd baked. "They weren't supposed to have those before dinner," she snapped, a chilling edge to her voice. "Just homemade cookies, dear. Not much sugar," I offered, trying to diffuse the sudden tension. Her face tightened, a mask of cold displeasure. "Don't call me dear. And I don't need you deciding what my children can or can't eat." I swallowed a bitter pill and retreated to my room, a knot tightening in my throat. I told myself it was just a bad day. Perhaps the interview hadn't gone well. We all have them, don't we? But the bad days multiplied, festered. The next week, she critiqued how I'd folded the children's laundry. "They get creases that way. You need to fold them inside out." I began to explain my lifelong method, but she cut me off, sharp as a knife. "This is my house, Susan. Things are done my way here." That phrase, "my house," twisted the knife. Technically, she was right. It was theirs. But I couldn't shake the memory. The land, our gift, every tile, every paint swatch, chosen with my input, months spent overseeing contractors, building it brick by brick. David watched, silent as a shadow. When I tried to broach Jessica's behavior with him, alone, he'd deflect. "Mom, she's just stressed with work. It'll pass." It didn't. The criticisms became a constant drip. How I arranged the kitchen, how I spoke to the children, the slightest morning noise. I began to feel like a ghost, an unwelcome guest, tiptoeing through the home I'd helped raise. The children, too, sensed the shift. Ethan, always the sensitive one, started to defend me. "But I like it when Grandma makes cookies, Mom," he piped up once, after Jessica's latest complaint about sweets. "Don't interfere, Ethan. Go to your room," she retorted, her voice devoid of warmth. I watched his small eyes well with tears as he trudged upstairs. That night, I wept into my pillow, a raw, aching grief for Arthur. He would have known. He would have known how to talk to our son, how to mend this unraveling. The baked ziti incident wasn't just the last straw. It was the match that lit the fuse. It was Sunday, Arthur's birthday. Even in his absence, I yearned to honor his memory. I prepared the baked ziti he adored, with the marinara sauce that had simmered for hours, a labor of love. I knew Lily disliked marinara. "It stains too much," Jessica always fretted, so I'd made a separate, smaller dish. Creamy white sauce, grated cheese, exactly as she preferred. I set the table with meticulous care, even placing a small framed photo of Arthur at the center, beside a tiny vase of garden flowers. I wanted it to be sacred, a tangible link to a grandfather the children would barely recall. When Jessica swept into the dining room, her face was already a thundercloud. David followed, Lily nestled in his arms. "Why did you do this? Lily doesn't eat marinara, you know that," she spat, her eyes deliberately bypassing the separate dish I'd prepared. "I made white pasta for her. It's right here," I explained, gesturing to the smaller casserole. "That's not the point. You always do everything your way, as if this house were yours to command. But I only wanted to. You only wanted attention, as always. I'm sick of your constant presence, your endless comments, your tired old stories nobody wants to hear." David finally weakly intervened. "Jessica, please, it's just lunch." And then, the words that would shatter my world. "No, David. Your mother thinks she can do whatever she wants because she helped build this house. But she's absolutely useless here. She just messes up our whole routine." After that fateful Sunday, I retreated. 3 days, practically barricaded in my room. I'd only emerge for the bathroom or a quick bite, timing it to avoid any encounter. The children would tap on my door, asking why Grandma wasn't coming out to play, and I'd offer a weak excuse about a headache, promising to be better soon. On Wednesday, David's knock. He was alone. Jessica had taken the kids to school. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling heavily on the edge of my bed. He looked utterly drained, deep hollows beneath his eyes. "I don't think this situation is working for anyone." "Son, I can try harder. I can adapt, do things exactly as Jessica prefers." He shook his head, a gesture of defeat. "It's not that, Mom. Jessica, she's under immense pressure at work. She might lose her job in the next restructuring. She's bringing it all home, taking it out on everyone." "I understand, son. I can help more. Perhaps manage the house while she looks for another job." "Mom," he cut me off, his voice thick, eyes glistening. "I think you need to find somewhere else. At least for a while, until things settle down here." The words landed like a physical blow. "You're asking me to leave?" "It's not what I want, but it's what's best for everyone." "Jessica is. She's not well, Mom, and your presence is only escalating the tension." "And where would I go, David? I sold my house to come here." "You still have the money from the sale, don't you? You could rent a small apartment, maybe nearby, so you can still see the kids." In that crushing moment, the truth crystallized. My own son no longer saw me as his mother, but as a problem. A burden to be managed, not a parent to be protected. "How much time do I have?" I asked, my voice barely a thread. "No rush, Mom, but maybe a week to find something suitable." "A week? 7 days to dismantle a life and rebuild it at 67. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, as if we were discussing a pleasant outing, not my quiet expulsion. But the moment the door clicked shut behind him, I crumbled. I wept with a raw intensity I hadn't known since Arthur's funeral, burying my face in a pillow to smother the ragged sobs. I couldn't bear for the children to hear me when they returned. That very afternoon, I began the grim search. A few calls to old friends yielded little. Most were widows like me, living with their own children or in assisted living. I found a modest boarding house downtown, not far from David's place. It was a far cry from my retirement dreams, but it would serve. 3 days later, a small suitcase, holding little more than the remnants of my dignity, was all I carried as I left the house I'd helped build. David drove me to the boarding house, his discomfort palpable. He hauled my bag up to the second-floor room, a stark cubicle with a twin bed, a cramped closet, and a window that offered only a brick wall for a view. "Mom, this is temporary," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "You'll find a better apartment soon." "It's all right, honey," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've weathered worse storms." He offered an awkward, fleeting hug before he fled. "I'll call every day and you can see the kids on weekends, I promise." I nodded, plastering on a smile that crumbled the instant the door clicked shut. I sank onto the edge of the unforgiving bed, staring at the peeling paint, and the question echoed in the silence. How, at 67, after a lifetime of labor and devotion, had I landed here? The weeks that followed were a desolate stretch. David's calls were brief, perfunctory. Phone conversations with the grandkids were rushed. Jessica's presence a palpable pressure, hurrying them along. The first 2 weekends, David brought the children, but the tiny room felt suffocating, the visits strained. The third weekend, a birthday party. The fourth, colds. The pattern, stark and undeniable, began to emerge. My days became a monotonous loop. Aimless walks through the neighborhood, small purchases at the corner market, and hours spent in the communal living room, watching television with other women adrift in similar circumstances. The house sale money sat untouched in the bank, a terrifying nest egg. What if I fell ill? What if I needed costly medical care? It was on one of those empty afternoons, adrift downtown, that fate intervened. I literally bumped into Celia, an old colleague from my seamstress days, long before Arthur. She was emerging from a fabric store, arms laden. "Susan, my God, it's been ages!" she exclaimed, her hug a burst of genuine warmth. "I heard about Arthur. I'm so terribly sorry." We found a quiet coffee shop, and through a blur of tears, I poured out my story. The loss of my husband, the brutal expulsion from the home I'd built, my solitary existence in a boarding house at 67. Celia listened, her gaze unwavering, her warm hands cradling my wrinkled ones. When I finished, a thoughtful silence settled between us. "Susan," she asked, her voice gentle, "can you still sew?" "Of course," I replied, a ghost of a smile. "Some things you never truly forget." "I have a friend who needs someone for small clothing repairs. Nothing complex. Hems, zippers, simple alterations. She runs a small boutique and her seamstress just retired." A fragile spark ignited in my chest. Do you think she'd consider me? At my age? Age? Susan, your hands were always the most gifted in the entire atelier. I'm calling her right now. As Celia spoke on the phone, I reflected on life's strange, circular dance. Here I was, on the cusp of returning to a craft I hadn't touched in over 40 years. Yet it wasn't sadness I felt. It was possibility. As if a hidden door had swung open, just as all the others had slammed shut. "She wants to meet you tomorrow," Celia announced, hanging up with a triumphant smile. 9 in the morning at her shop. It's only 3 blocks from here. That night, I returned to my cramped room with a sensation I hadn't known in months. Purpose. I dug through my meager suitcase, found the most presentable dress, and pressed it with the landlady's borrowed iron. For the first time since I'd left David's house, I slept without a single tear. Mrs. Lords' shop, Celia's friend, was small, yet radiated warmth. A boutique specializing in women's wear, it boasted a quiet corner in the back, complete with a sewing machine and a generous cutting table. Celia spoke very highly of you. Mrs. Lords greeted me, a robust woman with impeccably styled brown hair. "Let's try a test, shall we? I have a dress here that needs a hem and sleeves adjusted." My hands quivered slightly as I threaded the needle, but the moment the fabric slid beneath the presser foot, time dissolved. The stitches emerged flawless, uniform, almost imperceptible on the delicate material. "You're hired!" Mrs. Lords declared, her eyes sparkling as she inspected my work. "You can start tomorrow. I pay per piece, and if things pick up, we can discuss a fixed salary down the line." I walked out of that shop on air. The moment I reached the boarding house, I called David, bursting to share my news. "That's great, Mom," he said, but his voice was flat, distant, laced with a familiar worry. "Look, I gotta run. We're dealing with some stuff here. I'll call you later." I hung up, a familiar pang in my chest. I'd wanted his joy, his pride. But I understood. He had his own battles. Perhaps Jessica truly was on the brink of losing her job, just as he'd feared. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in work. Small repairs gave way to curtain orders for Mrs. Lord's clients, and soon I was tackling complex alterations on formal gowns. My reputation as a skilled seamstress began to ripple through the shop's clientele. One afternoon, While meticulously stitching a formal dress, a woman entered, carrying a large box. "I hear you have an exceptional seamstress," she told Mrs. Lords. "I need someone to create clothes for my collector dolls. Something exquisite, with an impeccable finish." Mrs. Lords beckoned me over. When I opened the box, a breathtaking porcelain doll gazed up at me. Delicate face, luminous glass eyes. "I can certainly do this," I affirmed, examining the doll. "What style of outfit do you envision?" "A period dress, Victorian era. Something truly elegant, with intricate lace and tiny, perfect details. I'll pay handsomely for quality." And just like that, by a stroke of serendipity, I stumbled upon a surprisingly lucrative niche. Collector doll clothing. The woman, Mrs. Elisa, was so delighted with my work she became my most enthusiastic evangelist, recommending me to her entire circle of collector friends. Soon, orders poured in. Miniature wedding gowns, meticulously detailed historical costumes, tiny winter ensembles complete with minuscule coats and thimble-sized gloves. Within 6 months, I'd amassed enough savings to escape the boarding house. I leased a small house in a peaceful neighborhood, a short walk from Mrs. Lord's shop. No luxury, but it was mine. I painted the walls a cheerful butter yellow, planted vibrant geraniums in the tiny front garden, and transformed the spare bedroom into my dedicated sewing studio, complete with a generous cutting table and my very own sewing machine, purchased with hard-earned savings. Throughout this period, my contact with David and the children remained sporadic. His calls were infrequent, always accompanied by a new excuse for not visiting. The children's drawings arrived by mail, the thoughtful gesture of a teacher, I suspected, knowing Jessica would hardly encourage our connection. Then, one afternoon, as I meticulously stitched a minuscule doll dress, the doorbell chimed. My heart seized. Standing on my porch was my grandson, Peter, a small backpack slung over his shoulder, his eyes swollen and red-rimmed from weeping. "Grandma," he choked out, collapsing into my embrace. "Can I stay here today? Dad and Mom are fighting again." I held him fiercely, his small frame trembling against mine. What fresh hell had erupted in the house I'd abandoned? How had he, a child, found his way here alone? "Of course you can, my love," I murmured, guiding him inside. "Did you come by yourself? How did you know where I lived?" "Dad showed me once when we drove past. He said it was where Grandma lived now. I took a bus." A bus. My 9-year-old grandson navigating the city alone. The realization sent a cold dread through me. "I'm calling your dad. He must be frantic." "No!" Peter cried, clutching my arm. "He won't even notice I'm gone. They're screaming too loud." I made him hot chocolate, and the moment Peter succumbed to sleep on the sofa, utterly spent from his tears and his brave, solitary journey, I called David. The phone rang and rang before a strained, "Hello," answered. "Honey, it's your mom. Peter's here with me." "What? What do you mean? He's supposed to be in his room." David's voice sharp with panic. "He took a bus by himself, David. He said you two were fighting and he wanted to stay with me." A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. Then, a profound, weary sigh. "I'm coming to get him." "You don't have to come now, honey. He's fast asleep. He can stay here tonight and you can pick him up tomorrow." Another pause, pregnant with unspoken burdens. "Okay, Mom. Thank you. We're going through a really rough patch. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not over the phone. Tomorrow when I pick up Peter." That night, watching my grandson sleep peacefully on my sofa, I marveled at life's unpredictable currents. 6 months ago, I'd been cast out, branded useless, from the home I'd helped build. Tonight, I had my own sanctuary, a craft I adored, and my grandson had sought me out in his hour of desperate need. The next morning, I prepared a feast for Peter. Pancakes drizzled with syrup, his absolute favorite. He seemed calmer, utterly captivated by my sewing studio and the miniature doll clothes. "Can I learn to do this, Grandma?" he asked, examining a tiny hat I'd finished the night before. "Of course, my love. I'll teach you everything." We were deep in a lesson on basic stitching when the doorbell chimed. It was David, looking as if a decade had etched itself onto his face since our last meeting, deep shadows beneath his eyes, stubble darkening his jaw, clothes rumpled. "Peter, go get your things. We need to leave," he stated, his voice flat, the moment he stepped inside. "But Dad, Grandma's teaching me to sew." "Now, Peter." As the boy reluctantly left the room, David sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "Mom, I'm so profoundly sorry for all of this. They're a disaster at home." I sat beside him, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, my son truly unburdened himself. He spoke of the fractured marriage, the crushing financial strain, the relentless pressure. Jessica had indeed lost her job, just as he'd feared, and the bills were suffocating them. Their fights were relentless, and the children, they were caught in the crossfire. "I should have defended you that day," he finally choked out, tears brimming. "I feel like such a coward. I let Jessica kick you out because it was easier than facing another fight." His words, raw and honest, washed over me like a healing balm. They couldn't erase the sting of what had happened, but they were an acknowledgement, an apology I hadn't dared to dream of. "It's all right, son. We all stumble." "No, Mom, it's not all right. I hurt you. I abandoned you when you needed me most, after everything you and Dad did for us." I pulled my son into a tight embrace, feeling his tears soak my shoulder, just as they had when he was a small boy, running to me after a scraped knee or a tumble from his bike. "What happens now?" I asked softly when his sobs subsided. "I don't know. I think our marriage is over. She's changed. Bitter. She blames everyone else for her own problems. And the children. They're suffering. Peter's having nightmares, and Sophie started wetting the bed again. My heart twisted. My precious grandchildren, bearing the brunt of adult failures. "They can come visit me whenever they want," I offered, my voice gentle. "I have plenty of space here. It might be good for them to have a quiet haven sometimes." David nodded, swiping at his tears. "Thank you, Mom. I miss you. I miss how things used to be." When Peter reappeared with his backpack, David seemed visibly lighter, as if sharing his burden had lifted a crushing weight. "Can we come back tomorrow, Grandma?" Peter asked, hugging me fiercely at the door. "Of course you can, my love. And bring your sister, too. I'll teach you both to bake cookies." David offered a faint, yet genuine smile. "We'll be back, Mom. I promise." And unlike his past promises, this one, he kept. In the weeks that followed, Peter and Sophie began spending their weekends with me. I taught them to sew buttons, to bake cookies, to nurture the garden plants. My little house hummed with children's laughter, with joyful chaos, with life. David would pick them up Sunday nights, often lingering for dinner. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to mend our fractured relationship. It wasn't the same as before. Deep wounds always leave their indelible marks. But it was a beginning, And Jessica? Well, that's a story for another time. One no one, least of all me, ever saw coming. Because life, as I've learned at 67, is a master of the unexpected, delivering both profound pain and unforeseen joy. 6 months later, David and Jessica's marriage finally fractured. It was a brutal, yet inevitable decision after years of escalating fights and festering resentments. David sought my help finding a nearby apartment, small, but enough for the children on his weekends. The divorce was a bitter, drawn-out affair, fraught with arguments over custody and the division of assets. Jessica kept the house, the very one I'd helped them build, while David shouldered the bulk of their joint debts. A sharp pang of bitterness twisted in my gut, knowing she remained in the home that held so much of my heart. But life, I've learned, delights in such cruel ironies. What truly stunned me happened one rainy April afternoon, nearly 8 months after my departure. The doorbell chimed, and when I opened it, Jessica stood there, drenched beneath a collapsing umbrella, looking smaller, more fragile than I remembered. "Susan, can I just come in for a moment?" she whispered, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I hesitated, a beat of raw memory, but the deluge outside offered no alternative. "Of course, come in." She stepped inside, shaking the rain from her umbrella, and stood awkwardly in the center of my small living room, her gaze sweeping around with a hesitant curiosity. Her eyes lingered on the framed photos of the grandchildren, the miniature doll clothes artfully arranged on the coffee table, the vibrant geraniums spilling from the window boxes. "It's a lovely house," she murmured, still not looking at me. "So cozy." "Thank you. Would you like some tea? It's quite chilly out there." She nodded, and I left her to compose herself in the kitchen. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, she was perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Susan, I came to apologize," she finally managed, her voice barely a breath. "I was so consumed by jealousy over your bond with the children, so angry at my own life, and I took it all out on you." I settled into the armchair opposite, studying her face. She looked utterly ravaged, as if years had been carved into her features in mere months. "Why now, Jessica? After all this time?" She took a long sip of her tea, as if drawing courage from the warmth. "I'm in therapy," she confessed, her voice thin. "After David left, I finally saw how I was pushing everyone who loved me away. My therapist, she suggested I make peace with my past, starting with you. So I'm on your therapy homework list?" I couldn't help the dry, ironic edge to my voice. "It's not just that," she insisted, finally meeting my gaze, her eyes raw. "The children miss you. They talk about you constantly. The grandma who bakes cookies, who tells stories, who teaches sewing. And I finally realized how truly unfair I'd been. How much I'd hurt someone who only ever wanted to help." A heavy silence descended, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain against the windows. "You called me useless, Jessica, in front of my grandchildren, and you threw me out of the house I helped build." She lowered her eyes, shame burning in her cheeks. "I know. There are no excuses. I was terrified of losing my job, consumed by the failure of my marriage. And you just seemed so perfect. The children adored you. The house was always immaculate. Even David seemed happier when you were around. I only wanted to help, to be useful. I see that now. Then all I could see was a threat. Someone who effortlessly did everything better than me. who stole my children's affection. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting her words settle. Part of me screamed to send her away, to tell her it was far too late for apologies. But another part, perhaps the mother in me, honed by decades of nurturing, saw past the anger, saw the broken woman pleading before me. "What do you want from me, Jessica?" "Your forgiveness. That's too much to ask, I know. But perhaps a second chance. For the children's sake. They keep asking when they can visit you." "David brings them on weekends." "Yes, but on the days they're with me, they miss you too." That caught me off guard. Jessica inviting me to see the children on her days? "You want me to visit the house?" "If you're comfortable. Or I can bring them here. Whatever you prefer." I searched her face, trying to discern any hidden agenda. But all I saw was a woman exhausted by her own bitterness, desperately trying to mend the fabric of her past. "Why this now, Jessica? The real reason." She sighed, a deep, shuddering breath. "Last week I found Sophie crying in her room. When I asked what was wrong, she said she'd made a drawing for you at school, but didn't know how to give it to you. She said, 'Did Grandma leave because she didn't love us anymore?' And I realized she believed you'd chosen to abandon us." My heart plummeted. My little granddaughter thinking I'd abandoned her? "I would never have left you by choice, Jessica. You know that." "I know, and that's why I'm here. To fix what can be fixed." Forgiveness wasn't easy, but life had taught me that resentment was a poison that only consumed the one who held it. On that rainy afternoon, we took the first tentative step towards a reconciliation neither of us had ever dared to imagine. The very next week, Jessica brought the children to visit. Sophie launched herself into my arms the moment she saw me, clinging to my neck as if she'd vanish again. "Grandma, look what I made for you," she squealed, pressing a colorful drawing into my hand. 4 stick figures, hands clasped. "Me, Peter, you, and Mommy," she explained, pointing to each one. I met Jessica's gaze across Sophie's head, a complex mix of relief and melancholy in her eyes. A silent understanding passed between us. We wouldn't be friends. Too many wounds ran too deep for that. But we could, for the children's sake, coexist in peace. In the month that followed, a new rhythm took hold. The children visited regularly, sometimes with David, sometimes with Jessica. On special occasions like Peter's birthday, we'd all gather. A strange yet remarkably functional arrangement. Today, 2 years after that searing expulsion, my small sewing business flourishes. My collector doll clothes are renowned throughout the city, and I've recently begun teaching sewing classes to a vibrant group of young mothers in the neighborhood. My grandchildren spend cherished time with me, and even Jessica visits occasionally, bringing a homemade cake or flowers from the garden. That same garden Arthur and I had lovingly planned so many years ago. David has found new happiness with Clara, a kind teacher who treats his children with genuine warmth and welcomed me into her life without reservation. Jessica, too, is moving forward, focused on her career and the children's well-being. As for me, I've discovered that life is a tapestry of endless chapters, and it is never, ever too late to begin a new one. My little yellow house, with its cheerful geraniums and the studio brimming with colorful fabrics, has become more than a home. It's a haven, not just for me, but for all those I hold dear. Sometimes sitting on this porch, watching the sunset paint the sky and listening to the birds settle into their evening chorus, I reflect on life's profound full circle. I remember that terrible night, those cruel, shattering words. You are completely useless here. And how they broke me into a million pieces. But then I look around, and I see what I've painstakingly built from those fragments. A new life, a renewed purpose, a deeper way to love and be loved. I was called useless and cast out from the home I helped build, but I unearthed a strength within me I never knew existed. I built not just a new house, but a new version of myself. Stronger, wiser, more whole. Just last week, an unexpected call. The local community center inviting me to teach sewing classes for women in circumstances similar to my own. Older women, many widows, searching for a fresh start. I accepted without hesitation. Tomorrow marks my first class. I've meticulously prepared simple handouts, sorted vibrant fabric scraps, and organized needles and thread with the reverence of someone who knows she's offering more than just stitches. She's offering possibility. When I gaze into the mirror today, I no longer see the broken woman who left her son's house with a single small suitcase. I see a 69-year-old woman with eyes that sparkle, hands that are skilled, and a heart that, despite the scars, or perhaps because of them, has learned to love in ways I never imagined. And that was the biggest surprise of all. Not even I saw it coming. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Life rarely follows the script we meticulously plan. Sometimes the deepest heartaches pave the way for the most profound discoveries. And even when someone declares us useless, it is our sacred task to prove, first to ourselves, then to the world, that our worth is an intrinsic flame, not dependent on the fickle validation of others. Every stitch I place in my miniature doll dresses, every cookie I bake with my grandchildren, every flower I nurture in my garden, is a quiet, powerful affirmation. I am here. I am important. I have value. And when the children burst through my door, shouting, "Grandma!" When my students proudly display their first perfect seams, when David calls me just to share the mundane details of his day, I know I've constructed something far more precious than a house of bricks and mortar. I've built a home within myself, a sanctuary no one can ever take from me.